The other presentation is about Missouri history. This one is focused on the government part. We'll start with our Constitution. And the starting point for talking about the Missouri Constitution is to understand that it is the fourth Constitution. And to give you some perspective beyond just our state, it is not uncommon for states to have more constitutions than the United States with its two historical constitutions. And some of that is just how being a state is different. The first one was the 1820 Constitution, and Missouri became a state in 1821. So this is the Constitution that was created so that we could satisfy constitutional requirements for statehood. Because remember, to be a state, according to Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution, you must have a republican form of government. So the 1820 Constitution lays out what republican government, and by that I mean representative democracy, is going to look like in Missouri. And if you were at all afraid that we were going to talk in great detail about all four constitutions, I hope by now those fears are put to bed. We're not going to say anything more about them than what we need to. Our 1865 Constitution was kind of a consequence of Missouri's unique role in the Civil War. Missouri was a slave state. Missouri did not secede from the Union. So even after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, slavery continued to be legal and slaves continued to be enslaved in Missouri. Said Missouri also had a lot of Confederate sympathies. Our own particular part of the state, it was known for its pro-Confederacy insurgency. And so, like a lot of states that had seceded after the Civil War, we got a new constitution that was anti-Confederate. It was meant to shut those former Confederate sympathizers out of Missouri government and ensure that only people who had been continuously loyal to the Union were able to participate in politics or even vote in elections. It did not last very long. Kind of like Reconstruction did not last all that long and certainly did not complete its objectives after the Civil War. Our third Constitution, we need to know for these two things, first and foremost. One, it made the legislature weaker. And because even as early as 1875, states are dealing with more money to carry out their functions. And so this created a way to manage the state budget. And this was also a time of pretty rapid growth for the state of Missouri. When you have more people, the economy is growing, there's more money, which is a good problem, but you do have to manage how to take it in and spend it. Our current Constitution is now 80 years old, or at least will be at some point in this year. Thankfully, the civics test no longer requires you to memorize specific days, months, and years that constitutions went into effect. Our current Constitution has our state's Bill of Rights. It has 13 articles. Remember, the U.S. Constitution only has 7, and only 6 of those really continue to be relevant. The 7th article was just about ratifying the Constitution. Our state constitution is therefore nearly twice as long. That's also pretty common for state constitutions to be much more detailed. does continue to have a plan for 3 branches of government. What sets this one apart from its predecessors is not a surprise, given that it came about in 1945. By 1945, governments are doing a lot more than they had been doing in 1875. They're providing for compulsory public education. They're dealing with more sophisticated networks of transportation. And just by 1945, government at all levels is just more active and bigger. Also, in its list of topics, you can see that it deals with public employees. A bigger, more active government employs more people. Not only are state constitutions, including our own, longer and more detailed than the U.S. Constitution, they're also amended more frequently. And it happens more frequently partly because it's easier to do. There are 3 ways to amend the state constitution. The first is what's called the proposal. And here, pay attention to the differences. It is really easy in your mind to think that the state governments would tend to do things like the federal government. And some of it is similar. But the standards are lower. So the General Assembly, which we'll talk about, it has 2 houses, and we'll get to them. The General Assembly proposes an amendment by simple majorities in both chambers. Remember, for the U.S. Constitution, for Congress to propose an amendment, you need 2/3 votes in both houses. For us, it is simply a majority. It then goes to voters in the next election. And again, continuing the theme of a lower bar for amending the Constitution, all that is needed is a simple majority of voters. Remember, to ratify an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, you need 3/4 of states, one way or another, whether it's through state conventions or state legislatures, you need 3/4. For us, simple majority. As we look at these different mechanisms, sometimes you will see that we have pretty rapid fire changes to the Constitution that actually kind of undo each other, and they come about in different ways. The second method for changing the Constitution is the initiative. So when I told you from that practice EOC that you probably didn't know that much about the initiative yet because we hadn't really talked about it, this is when we're going to talk about it. You get a certain number of citizens to sign a petition. Now, that number changes. And it also depends on what you're doing. So there are 2 different amendments. One is a statutory amendment. That just adds a law to Missouri's legal code. What we're talking about is a constitutional amendment, which, as you guessed, actually changes Missouri's constitution. Notice that the bar for that is higher. You have to get 170,000 plus signatures for your initiative petition. If that does not sound like a lot, you'll still be able to get that. 170 does not sound like a lot. Missouri has over 6 million people. You have to get those signatures from all different parts of the state. You can't just go to Kansas City, Columbia, and St. Louis and round up your signatures. You have to also go to rural parts of the state to get signatures. If you meet that standard and the amendment gets on the ballot, then again, all that is needed for that amendment to become part of Missouri's Constitution is a simple majority. And Missourians have used that multiple times just in my lifetime. And I know I'm old, but I'm not that old. It hasn't been that long a lifetime yet, to do really important changes. The third is the Constitutional Convention. Missouri voters just recently had the opportunity to vote on this because it happens automatically every 20 years. Every 20 years on the ballot, there is a question for voters. Should the state hold a new constitutional convention? If a majority vote to hold a convention, then delegates will be called up. They will meet to decide to change or draft a brand new constitution, and then that would go back to Missouri voters to vote either in favor of adopting a new constitution or to keep the current constitution. Which to me is kind of an interesting thing, that every 20 years, whether anybody has been asking for one or not, we get the chance to have a new constitution. And again, the bar is not very high. If there were to be a new constitution, all you would need is a simple majority of voters to pass it. Let's now look at our government. And lucky for you, some of the things that you are required to know are not as nitpicky as the things that you probably had to learn in elementary school, that my son had to learn in elementary school about the state, including the meaning of all the different parts of the flag. But you do have to know that our state slogan is the Show Me State, which kind of has two different interpretations. The favorable one is that Missourians are a skeptical lot and we're not easily suckered. And if you try to convince us of something, we want to see it. We want to see the evidence. We're not just going to take you at your word. The more pejorative take on this is that Missourians are slow on the uptake and you have to show them. As a Missourian, I'm going to lean towards the first interpretation. Our government is headquartered in Jefferson City, colloquially known as Jeff City, basically south of Columbia, Missouri, at the center of the state. And yes, that really is our Capitol building. I know I have some students who are pretty down on the state of Missouri in general and imagine that, I don't know, that our state government is headquartered in, a closed down Sears department store or something. Nope, that is our Capitol building. It's actually quite nice.
Do you have names of the students that work here?
And of course, that government has three branches: legislative and executive and judicial, like the federal government. And something we have not talked about in quite a while. Remember, we have discussed confederal, federal, and unitary systems. States operate as unitary systems, meaning the central government has ultimate control. It can create and destroy local government bodies. It can take control of local government functions if it wants to. It has done this for cities like Kansas City in terms of imposing certain requirements on how their police force operates, for example. And as we've discussed, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education can take over local school districts if they're not meeting the state standards. So it is very much a unitary system where the central government for the state in Jefferson City has the ultimate authority. Local governments do not have their own independent, guaranteed existence and autonomy. Now look at the legislative branch. Like any other legislative branch, it makes the laws for our state. Ours collectively is known as the General Assembly. So different name than Congress, but like Congress, ours is also bicameral. And states having bicameral legislatures is pretty typical, but not all of them do. The Senate is our upper house, and it has 34 members. Now you're in luck here, because sometimes you might be required to know that there are 33 members in our Senate. So we're going to talk about our senator represents the 34th district, and that makes it a little easier for us to remember. The terms are also different in our Senate. Members serve a 4-year term, and probably the most important difference is not how long the term is, but the fact that there are term limits. Remember, in the U.S. Congress, House, or Senate, you can serve as many terms as you can get elected to. But here, you can only serve 2 terms for a total of 8 years. And that's important because we're going to find out that the total is the same for both chambers. Your state senator is Republican Tony Luetkemeyer. I think he might be in his 2nd term. Our lower house is called the House of Representatives. And like the U.S. House of Representatives, it has a larger membership. 163 members. Like the U.S. House, members serve a 2-year term. Again, there are term limits. You can serve 4 2-year terms. So like I said, in both houses, the total term limit is 8 years. And your current representative is Bill Faulkner, former St. Joseph mayor, also a Republican. In this case, we are not the 163rd district for the House. We are the 10th district. Now, obviously, on the EOC, they can't ask John a question. John, which representative is yours? Because since all students take the EOC, the answer would be different for lots of students. Elections for members of both houses work like they do for the U.S. House of Representatives, single-member districts, simple plurality. We have some more images that are actually from our Capitol building. That's not from the ritzy section of lighting fixtures at Home Depot or restoration hardware down on the plaza. We really do have nice things. The General Assembly is not in session regularly for that much of the year. It is a part-time job. They're in session from January to May. And if you're thinking, well, what if something comes up in between times? There's a mechanism for that. The governor can call a special session. Or, if 3/4 majorities in both houses want to call a special session, they can call a special session. Of course, that means it's much easier for the governor to call a special session, because that's just one individual that has to make that decision. So if you ever notice paying attention to our state legislatures, if it seems like they have a day job, if that seems weird to you, they do, and it's not, because serving in our legislature is a part-time job. You wouldn't want to make your living as a Missouri legislator. One of the important parts of our legislature, and again, keep in mind, we have a part-time legislator. We have the Legislative Research Council. It is there to help part-time legislators do their jobs. It provides them information they need to write a bill. It will even help them write a bill. And if that makes you think that our legislators are not only part-time but unqualified, remember, bills are laws, so they have to be written using precise legal language. In the U.S. Congress, where we have so many people who have spent their lives being lawyers and then being legislators, it's not surprising that they don't need that kind of help to write bills. It's not necessarily a bad thing that we have legislators who work in other walks of life making laws. So them needing help, really, I don't want you to see that as a bad thing. Remember also that our legislators have term limits. So if Elliot wants to serve in the legislature, Elliot's got a grand total of 16 years, which is a long time, but it's not the decades that we can see with members of, say, the U.S. House or Senate. Since they spend less time in government, they may be less familiar with other previous laws or what's in the Constitution, because we amend our Constitution pretty frequently. And so the LRC helps to make sure that whatever new bill a legislator is drafting does not conflict with things that are already on the books. These are just maps of the different districts. This one is the House. There is your district that you live in and are currently in. This is your Senate district, which covers a wider area. Remember, Senate districts are smaller. Or sorry, the number of Senate districts is smaller. The districts themselves are geographically larger. The executive branch does what any executive branch does. It executes the laws. Our executive branch, in some ways, looks like the federal executive branch. But it is led by a large number of elected officials. Okay, so we don't just have a governor who appoints their people and runs on a ticket with a vice governor. We don't even call him vice governor. We'll get to that. Because kind of the complex nature of our executive branch, we're going to have to look at each piece of it kind of on its own. Hence the creepy eye looking through the people. We'll start with the governor. And man, when I updated this, I had a picture of this guy when he was lieutenant governor. I don't remember lieutenant governor being that hard a job, but he has aged a lot. A lot. I hope I don't age that much in the next 8 years. Currently, our governor is Mike Kehoe. The governor sounds kind of like the state version of a president, and they have some of the same functions. They are the commander-in-chief, according to the Constitution, of the state militia. States don't actually have militias. We have National Guard units. The governor has appointment powers. Here, really, mostly we're talking about judges. However, if there's a vacancy somewhere in the executive branch, the governor can appoint people to fill those vacancies. There's some other appointment powers beyond that, but those are the ones you need to know. Now be careful here, because a lot of this sounds the same. Proposes the budget, has pardoning powers, has the power to veto bills. We're going to talk about something that makes that, especially the veto power, a little different. They also give, much like the president gives a State of the Union address, the governor gives a State of the State address. Aside from the name, the biggest difference is almost nobody watches the State of the State address. It is not like the State of the Union address that gets lots of media attention. I tried to watch one once. I will be honest with you, it does not hold your attention. Eight is kind of the magic number. Here it also lines up with what we typically get for presidents, a 4-year term with the possibility of 2 terms. Now, I give you the formal qualifications partly because you may well be tested over them. So if it sounds like I'm teaching to the test on this, I kind of am. But looking at the formal qualifications for different executive branch offices helps you understand how important they are considered to be. So for governor, 30 years old, you have to have been a U.S. citizen for at least 15 years. So both of those are a lower bar than for running for president of the United States. You have to have been a resident of the state of Missouri for 10 years. I mean, they want you to know what's going on here. In terms of informal qualifications, well, remember that Missouri is increasingly a red state. And so one of the things that seems to be an informal qualification is you need to cultivate an image that you are friendly to firearm ownership. And I don't mean this as a criticism. This is just an observation that in the state of Missouri, right, candidates for governor go out of their way to let you know that they like guns. And being endorsed by pro-gun groups like the National Rifle Association is very important. It usually makes a difference. In this case, I mean, it was kind of strange. Chris Koster was running, this was back in 2018, 2016. Chris Koster was running for governor, and he was running as a Democrat. But he'd been in office for a long time, and he had once been a Republican, and he got the endorsement of the National Rifle Association. And the National Rifle Association usually endorses Republicans. He was running against Eric Greitens. What does Eric Greitens do, having not received the NRA's endorsement? He makes a campaign ad of him shooting guns and blowing stuff up. You can find it on YouTube. And he won that election. Right now, in terms of informal qualification, if you look at who ran for governor in the last election, the Republican won. That's why Mike Keogh, Republican, is the governor. And all of them tried to tie themselves very closely to the same kind of policies, bless you, that were being made by the Trump campaign for the presidential election. Okay, so informal qualifications run much along the lines of being affiliated with currently the major points of the Republican Party, or at least of Donald Trump. Lieutenant governors. I said we don't call them vice governors. They're lieutenant governors. They have the same formal qualifications as governor. No differences there. But they do not run on the same ticket as the governor. They run in their own separate election. So you can, and we have had in the past, Democrat governors and Republican lieutenant governors. I think that's the only combination that has ever existed in my lifetime. And of course now what's much more common, especially really since 2016, is you could expect both the governor and the lieutenant governor to be Republicans. The lieutenant governor has the same succession process as we would see for the vice president. So the lieutenant governor becomes governor if one of those things happen. Our previous governor, Mike Parsons, he became governor because Eric Greitens did win the election, but then he had to step down. He had some scandals, and particularly a legal problem that kind of pushed him out of office. Like a vice president, the lieutenant governor serves as the president of our Senate and breaks tie votes. And the current lieutenant governor is David Wassinger from Hannibal, Missouri. Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is, at the outset, not a very exciting sounding job. They are the archivist for the state, which means they keep the records of all of the official acts of the governor. They kind of like the secretaries take notes of meetings. They are also the keeper of the Great Seal of Missouri. And if it sounds like I'm making fun of that a little bit, I am. Partly because this is a thing that has shown up on tests and I have no idea why. Okay, this is the Great Seal of the state of Missouri. It's not like it exists in secret and you can only see it in person. I mean, that's obviously a photograph. It's the same thing that's on the state flag, but that is the seal, and it is in the Secretary of State's office. And he is the keeper of it. And if it shows up on a test, I don't want you to miss that question, as ridiculous as that question would be. It does not have any mystical or magical powers, to my knowledge. It will turn your sport coat bright red, I guess, if you look at it too long, and make your hair fall out. But beyond that, I can't tell that it has any mystical powers. What is more important about the Secretary of State for Missouri's citizens and their own lives is the Secretary of State manages our elections. For an initiative or a referenda, initiatives or referenda, or a referendum if it's just one, they're the ones that decide whether the language of a petition is okay and can be sent out for signatures. Same thing for a referendum. Now, a referendum, and you should write this down, a referendum removes a law or a constitutional amendment from Missouri law. Okay? Initiatives put something in the law, right? An initiative, referendums like a referee, right, pull things out, take them out of the game. That was my hokey way for remembering them, and I hope it helps you. They also certify elections. No election results in the state are official until they have been certified by the Secretary of State. Qualifications for this job are actually quite low. You have to have 1 year of Missouri residency. That's the only qualification that you need to know about. So, not a high bar. And that is, at least in my own experience living in the state of Missouri, the Secretary of State job is not usually a direct jumping off point for running for lieutenant governor or governor. When we get to Attorney General, you will see that the standards for that are higher, and also Attorney Generals very often do run for lieutenant governor or governor. But we're not to the Attorney General yet, to the Treasurer. As you would expect from the title, they keep the state's money. If the state has funds sitting around that need to be invested, their job is to invest those funds to make more money for the state. I think they're putting it all in crypto right now. I'm just kidding. They're not. I hope they're not putting it in crypto right now. Bar for this, also pretty low. 1 year of Missouri residency. The current treasurer is Vivek Malik. I guess I should run back just since I forgot to mention it. But never mind. We'll stop there. Now, what I will do is I will record the rest of this. All right, returning to the auditor. The position of auditor in the state of Missouri, let's see if I can't get this. There we go. The role of the auditor is to be the state's watchdog, and that is typically how they are referred to. That's not just flowery metaphoric language. They are known as the state's watchdog because they are the part of the executive branch that looks for various forms of fraud and making sure that the state has accurate, especially legal and financial records. And given the importance of this job and its high profile, the qualifications to run for auditor are the same qualifications you would need to run for governor or lieutenant governor. And that not only reflects the profile of this job, but also kind of the reality that being the auditor is often seen as a springboard to running for the higher offices of lieutenant governor or governor. And if you kind of watch the trajectory, the career trajectory of some Missouri politicians, that is their process. They move through different levels of government and different positions, run for auditor, and then subsequently run to be governor. That was what happened with the predecessor to Scott Fitzpatrick, Auditor Galloway. She may be for quite a while the last Democrat to hold the position of auditor for the state of Missouri, and she did use it as a springboard to run for governor, but was not successful in that run. Sorry for that, switching back and forth. All right, the Attorney General. The Attorney General is Missouri's official lawyer, representing the state in legal action. To be Attorney General, you do need to be an attorney. And because you often need to be close at hand for legal questions or representation, it is also required that the Attorney General lives in Jefferson City. You don't want them having to drive a couple hours across the state to deal with something. Also, as a citizen, I would point out to you that the Attorney General's office, whether or not at some point you have voted for the current Attorney General, support them, oppose them, whatever, the Attorney General's office has resources that can be important to you as a citizen of Missouri. They can help you if you're dealing with a business that's giving you trouble, perhaps. They can, through their offices, reach out to that business, let them know about the issue, and provide an at least semi-official position on the dispute, and that can help you kind of pressure that business into doing whatever maybe you paid them to do and they haven't done yet. I have had family members that have used the Attorney General's office in that way to deal with a business that was actually out of state and help pressure them to finish a job that they had been paid to do by a family member. If that family member had tried to go through their own lawyer and take it to court, it would have taken years, it would have cost them a lot of money, probably more money than just walking away from the problem entirely. And yet the Attorney General, working for that person as a Missouri resident, did that job. There was no additional payment required to do it. They simply act as on the behalf of that Missouri resident and help them solve a problem that would have cost them thousands of dollars, and had cost them thousands of dollars. And so if you have a problem, it's never a bad idea to take a look at the Attorney General's website, see if it looks like they can help you. And if you're not sure, just go ahead and contact the office, and someone will get back to you, and they will get back to you pretty promptly. onto the judicial branch, the third and final branch in our examination. This, like any judicial branch, has the job of interpreting the law. Our judicial branch has 3 levels, much like the judicial branch for the federal government. Those 3 levels are the circuit, appellate, and Supreme Courts. And we will look at each of those in turn. The circuit level is, as you might have guessed, it's the lowest level. There are 45 circuit courts throughout the state covering criminal and civil cases. We have one circuit court that is housed in the Buchanan County Courthouse. Some of those judges do also serve over trials that might take place outside of the Buchanan County Courthouse. They sometimes will see cases in Savannah, for example, rather than having to have the parties to those cases come down to St. Joe to go to the Buchanan County Courthouse. So if some of these faces look familiar to you, it's because you might have seen them around town. Circuit court judges serve 6-year terms, and they are up for election at the end of those terms. And typically they receive sufficient votes to be reelected as long as they want to continue to hold that job. Oftentimes they run unopposed, meaning there's no other candidate for that position on the ballot. But they are elected, which makes that different than federal judges. And we'll see that carry over to the appellate court as well. As you would guess from the name, this is the part that hears appeals from the circuit courts. So the circuit courts function as the trial courts. They deal with the original cases and evidence. They may have juries that consider the evidence and deliver verdicts, or it might be a bench trial and the judge delivers the verdict. The appeals level is different. It is not considering evidence from both sides and weighing that up to determine who's at fault or maybe who's innocent or guilty. They hear appeals. And appeals courts are looking for legal errors in the proceedings of the lower court. So they're not retrying cases. They're making sure that those cases ran as they should and delivered proper judgments according to the law and procedure. There are 3 appellate courts in the state of Missouri, one in Kansas City, one in St. Louis, and the other in Springfield. So in 3 of our major, our most important metropolitan areas, not excluding Columbia from that, but Columbia being midway between Kansas City and St. Louis. Springfield kind of fills a role in the southern part of the state. Here you can see that map. So the Kansas City Appellate Court covers the area that includes Columbia, the eastern part of the state, and then the court in Springfield deals with essentially the southern part of the state. Appellate judges being, a higher level of judge, not surprisingly serve a longer term. They serve a 12-year term. They are also, in order to continue on and receive another term, they must be supported by Missouri voters, at least within those appellate court jurisdictions. Supreme Court naturally is the highest court in the state. It has 7 justices as opposed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which has 9. And another thing that makes our Supreme Court different is that it usually splits up into 2 smaller working groups so that they can deal with more cases. And obviously with 7 judges, if it works in 2 divisions, you might have a different number of judges dealing with different cases. Like appellate court judges, Supreme Court judges also serve 12-year terms and must be supported in elections. Now, to this point, I haven't talked about what we specifically call it. if voters support a judge having another term, that is called retaining the judge. We use somewhat different language. We don't say they were reelected, we say they were retained by the voters. Now that we've considered all three branches, let's kind of look at the process of how a bill becomes a law in the state. And it's going to be a pattern that's pretty familiar to us from the U.S. Congress. Bills have to pass both chambers and then be signed by the governor. One of the things that makes our legislative process a bit different is, unlike the president, our governor has the power of the line item veto. Now, not for all bills. It has to be for appropriation, which means spending bills. As a result, the governor can reject specific line items, right, or specific parts of the spending bill while keeping the rest of it. Remember, the President of the United States either has to sign the bill or not, but they don't get to sign it with qualifications or caveats, and they certainly don't get to cross out things they don't like. Right, but Missouri governors, for appropriation bills, do have the line item veto. And that's an important power that the governor has, and one that seems to me likely to be part of a question asked of you at some point. We do also have the impeachment process, and it is, in some respects, similar to what we see at the federal level, at least at the beginning. The House impeaches, meaning they accuse a party in the executive or judicial branch of an impeachable offense, meaning an offense that could have them removed from office. What's different then is the trial does not go to the Senate. The Missouri Supreme Court tries the case unless a member of the Supreme Court itself or the governor is the impeached official. If that happens, then the Senate in our General Assembly will vote to appoint a commission of eminent jurists to try them. Now, eminent jurists is the term. To me, it sounds a little bit like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I don't know exactly who they would pick. Likely prominent attorneys, perhaps professors from Missouri University's law schools, perhaps retired judges. But whatever the case, the Senate would then pick a different body of jurists to conduct that trial, if it's a Supreme Court judge or the governor who has been impeached. Now, voting in elections at the state level, I mean, in a lot of ways, they're even more important than voting at the federal level, because we get vote on things very directly. Initiatives to put laws on the books, referenda to remove laws or amendments to the Constitution. We get to vote for multiple executive level offices. We get to vote to retain or turn out a judge. So elections are important. Federal elections kind of typically dictate the schedule. And those elections, remember, are held on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November of every even-numbered year. Now, that's important, even though it's federal elections, because state elections are typically held the same day. We obviously have some special elections that happen outside of that 2-year schedule. We just, in St. Joe, for example, we have levy and bond votes that happen outside of that 2-year schedule. Now, one of the things that has sometimes shown up, and so that you must know, this is not me trying to propagandize you in one way or another, but voters must be registered, and we register voters to prevent voting fraud and abuse. We need to make sure that if you are voting, right, you're only voting in one place in the state, that it is a place where you are actually a resident, and so that's why we register voters. Historically, that was not tied to any requirement that you present photo identification when you go to vote. You simply had to be registered. And typically what would happen is, and it still happens, is your county clerk will mail you a voter registration card. And it used to be that that's what you would show to go vote. As of a few years back, when I would go to vote and still out of habit take out my voter registration card, I was told to put it away, that I could actually throw it away, because now there's the state requirement that you present photo ID, and then they match that to their registration records at the polling place that you actually vote. To vote in Missouri elections, you must be a U.S. citizen, you must be at least 18, and you do have to be a resident of the state of Missouri. In a lot of states, you have to register as a member of a party at the time that you register to vote. In Missouri, you do not have to do that. The reason that some states require you to register with a party is they have what are called closed primaries. And I know you've learned a bit about that when you learned about elections. In closed primaries, you can only vote in the primary of the party listed as your affiliation in your voter registration records. Now, you can change that, but you would have to change it in order to get a different ballot. In Missouri, at the primary, you just go in and tell them what ballot you want. You want the Republican ballot? You want the Democrat ballot? The Greens, Libertarians? I think at times the Constitution Party has even had ballots. And so that makes our primary system, obviously, as the title goes, more open, but it makes crossover voting a fairly common phenomenon in our primary elections. If you, for example, if you might be a Republican, but you know who's going to win the nomination for, say, the Republican candidate for president in 2024. It's pretty clear that was going to be Donald Trump. If you were a Republican, you might do something a little strategic, and you might cross over to the Democrat side and ask for a Democrat ballot and vote for a candidate you think would be maybe a weaker opponent to Donald Trump. And that's something that happens. And it happens from the other side going the other way, too. And that's only possible because we have open primaries. State finances. There are a couple of things that you need to know, not a large number. One is that for the state of Missouri, the most important source of revenue is personal income tax, much like what we saw for the federal government. Although people pay, typically the rates are lower for state income taxes than they are for federal income taxes. If you haven't yet had to deal with that and now you're concerned that you have to pay income tax twice, you do, but not the same amounts. Of that money that comes in, the single biggest area of expenditure for the state of Missouri is on education. I should put that back up there. The state spends money on other things, but funding for education is the biggest single area of expenditure for the budget. The rest of it we won't concern ourselves with. And that concludes our notes about Missouri government. Remember, make sure you not only get these notes, but also the Missouri history notes. And then you will be ready for anything that might show up in a test in our class, or I hope on the EOC.